Why do we feel the way we do about sex and drugs? Is it really what we believe or just what we absorb?
And if those old stories aren't working, what would it look like to ask better questions about this part of our lives?
Today on the Slog Pod, we're taking on a topic most people won't touch. What's shaping our thinking around sex and drugs? What outcomes are we seeing? And is it time to rethink how we approach this as individuals and as a culture?
Welcome to the Slog Pod, where, we're going to go there.
So one thing I've noticed, people are walking around with a lot of shame, confusion, inherited stories about sex and drugs. But if you ask, where did that belief come from? Most people can't tell you.
Oh boy. Yeah, in the bigger picture, like when we're looking at culture, I see it. Everyone's got loud opinions. Everyone's got a POV on this. But how often do we ever really hear an honest conversation about the outcomes? About whether the way we think about sex and drugs is actually working for anyone? I don't hear it a lot.
Yeah. Well, that's what we want to do today. Not give answers. Hopefully just ask the questions that aren't getting asked in therapy and leadership and media, at your church, in your families, in your other systems, anywhere. So if you're listening, ask yourself, when you think about sex or about drugs, what do you feel first? Guilt, curiosity, judgment, fear, excitement? What do you feel?
Oh boy. Are you asking me? I mean, I'll tell you what came to my mind as you were asking that. Sex, for sure, and drugs also pretty much for sure. A lot of shame, guilt. But again, think of how I was raised.
Sure.
In the Christian church, sex is something that's reserved for marriage, one partner in your life, ever. That is the prevailing belief there, or value that's being given. Drugs, bad. All drugs, bad. Alcohol, pot, you name it. It's a sin. Your body is a temple. So anytime as a kid, I would do what kids do, which is get horny. So you're going through puberty. That's like a natural part of it. Instant guilt. Instant. I'm sinning. I'm making Jesus cry. I'm probably going to go to hell.
You're making Jesus cry.
Because the JCPenney catalog underwear section is arousing me. Seriously. We laugh about it now.
You aged yourself dramatically and that whole thing.
Some,
the JCPenney catalog. Okay, let's get this.
Gen Xers will know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, the point is, absolutely, my conditioning or the system I was in, that's where I think that came from, obviously.
So what did that do to you? You're telling me the things that were implied to you growing up. Was there a response to that? Did you have any deeper thoughts about outcomes when it came to that?
Beyond the eternal? No.
Beyond making Jesus cry?
Yeah, let me put it this way. If there was a self-pleasuring moment, of course I would be fearful that I'd get caught. Because that would be embarrassing.
Yeah.
And that's the immediate outcome. But also, I think, on a deeper level, I think it made me have some unhealthy attitudes about my own sexuality. And over the course of my young adult life, probably had some unhealthy relationships, or my relationships weren't as healthy as they could have been, especially as it related to intimacy and connection. I think back to some of the earliest girls I dated. For me, it was about conquest. It was ultimately about power. And that wasn't healthy.
That sounds cultural.
Probably was. And remember, when we grew up, it was very much the expectation that the man was the dominant Mm-hmm. Force in the relationship. Women are to be subservient to men. I mean, this is like ancient stuff that would just would not fly today, but that's how it was back in the 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think there was definitely a huge cultural element there.
Yeah, I definitely got that too. And I think what we're doing today, I think a lot of my background in those initial implied values were there. I don't know if there was a lot of introspection about what should happen or what would be healthiest for me or others. I think I might have had more introspection than most, but I think we're questioning this right now as we've got kids and we're wondering what it'll look like for them. And as I look at our media nowadays and what's being portrayed out there, it's interesting that as we bring up these two topics, sex and drugs, just like everything else, it seems things are being polarized. Meaning you got, on the one hand, you've got people saying, well, you need to be married to have sex. And on the other hand, you've got Bonnie Blue.
Right.
So
the opposite.
If anyone knows who that person is. So you've got different ways of thinking about that. And it's not what's just acceptable. It's what's your peers are pushing you to be. And I don't know. I think we're having this conversation to say, let's have a conversation. Like, I hope my kids have a conversation. Not only am I going to have a conversation with them when get to adolescence, but I think everyone should have that conversation about, and I know we brought up sex, but drugs, same thing, right? How we view drugs. And going back to the 80s, we talked about, all we heard is, this is your mind on drugs. It was horrible. And I tell you what, as I've aged, those things have changed how I view it. I'm taking it as it comes, meaning I look at each drug individually, what that does for me. Do I need it? Is it something that will provide a benefit for me or a good outcome? But I can say that now as an adult, and I'm not looking at it just as from a party standpoint either.
Yeah.
But I think that's where our discussion is going to go today, is to ask those questions that I don't know that anyone in our culture is asking. And from a therapeutic standpoint, I'm always asking, what's the outcome? Can we have that discussion? What does it look like? And I don't think that we're preaching to anybody saying this is the discussion you should have with your kids or with your partner or whatever that is, but to just, again, ask the questions and try to find out where that came from. Can we keep asking the questions? Can we find balance? Can we find middle ground rather than running to one side or the other as I gave a description of that? It's not to, oh, well, I'm not going to do any drugs or I'm going to do all the drugs. Right?
Yeah, finding the balance. And I think, again, there's a value to just having the conversation and the courage to say the stuff out loud. I mean, I just admitted some pretty embarrassing things, but actually I feel kind of liberated by it. And I think also, as it comes to outcomes, we're giving ourselves more options when it comes to how we view those outcomes versus just that polarized black and white. It's all bad or it's all good. It's just a healthier way to hold all that. And again, going back to not only my sex life when I was younger, but also my drug use. I probably experimented with drugs in the least healthy way a person could, because I wasn't even allowed to talk about it or think about it or even ask myself the question. It was just, the drugs are bad. Well, what does that do to a kid? Well, I want to rebel. I want to find out how bad these things really are. And boy, did I find out. Stop laughing at me.
Sorry. Yeah, I completely get it. So I guess if you're listening, when you think about sex or about drugs, what do you feel? We've asked that. What brought you to think that way about things?
Like, where did it come from?
Right. So we're doing some Socratic questioning.
Was it taught? Was it modeled? Absorbed?
Was there any in-depth thought about it? And I think these are two things that need some in-depth thought, don't they?
Absolutely.
Because the outcomes can be so bad that you'd think that we'd have some grounding mechanism in there that makes us find the healthiest way to deal with this.
And these are two big things in our culture. It's a human thing, sex and drugs.
Maybe another question, when was the last time you checked in on those beliefs? Are they yours? Are they just running in the background? Did you even think about that? I think about us growing up in the 80s, 90s, that sort of thing. I don't know that there was a lot of thought about it as far as sex goes. Or I remember the drugs thing. Yeah, there was a lot of stigma placed on it. And I think the stigma begins as a all encompassing, like all drugs are bad. And then the stigma starts to weigh off, especially as we got into the 2000s and marijuana was legalized in certain places, that sort of thing. Oh, all of a sudden, why is this kind of okay? So certainly there's been a change in our culture and how things like that are looked like. But I guess what I'm really pushing is, can we really observe what that is and what's health? What is health?
What are the good outcomes?
Yeah.
Or bad? What are the outcomes, period?
Sure.
Like, that's a discussion I don't think we've had enough. I certainly didn't have it growing up. And I think it'd be healthy for all of us to think about that as it applies to ourselves, our relationships, and the culture that we're in.
Yeah, I think here's what kind of worries me. We've got a lot of performance around sex and drugs and culture right now, and the outcomes can look horrific, as I discussed.
The Diddy saga.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That seems like the paragon of
how bad this can get.
Bad outcomes.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So imagine, I can't imagine being involved in that or knowing someone that was involved in all of that. Wow. Think about that. That's leading our culture in a way.
And we're seeing it. We have record levels of sexual dissatisfaction, loneliness, rising sexual dysfunction, even in young people. Like I saw an article about that recently where young people are really struggling with that. On the drug side, massive casual use, a lot of addiction and abuse, but also massive burnout and just emotional flatness, even from prescribed drugs.
Absolutely. Numbing, disconnection. It's happening. Less real intimacy with self or others. So what are we doing? What's actually working or not working?
And why aren't more people asking
that question?
Right? Why can't we have this conversation? Why is it so surface level when we do try to do it? We're talking about like the sex positivity, or again, the drugs are bad, or I've even seen psychedelics will save you. Next big thing. Well, hit pause real quick. Let's talk about it for real.
I hear those things, and it goes back to when I'm in therapy with someone, when they give me responses like that, those are polarized responses, or they're all or nothing responses, that black and white, that rigid thinking of a way to see something. It's just a warning flag to say, I don't know, is there a different way to see this? And are you finding balance in what that looks like? And I think these are two topics, sex and drugs, it's hard to find. It's really tough to find that. And if you have a bad outcome, man, those bad outcomes can live with you for the rest of your life.
Oh, they can destroy your life or kill you. We've both worked in the substance use treatment industry. And
absolutely.
We've just seen literally the worst outcomes. And not just to the addict, to their system, their families, their communities, all of it. And I think that's what the danger is when we start swinging to the extremes, we lose the ability to consider our values, to have some discernment, and we get into abuse, addiction, etc. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in our culture right now.
Yeah. You brought up values. I think that's a big piece. The burnout, the boundary collapse, the self-harm, it goes on and on. So maybe I can ask you a question. Where should values be a part of that? Are we having a values discussion?
I think we're at least having a discussion about how we develop our values around those subjects. So it's not really rules, not slogans. It's actually, it is values. And what values are going to guide us toward behavior?
Do you think our culture is having that discussion? Or are people just stating where they're kind of planting their flagpole of where they stand on those values?
It seems to me that it's much more just the statement. This is where I stand on these issues. I've talked to people who even about alcohol, will not even touch it. They have a value associated with that. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying it doesn't seem like they they have much of an explanation. They just have a belief.
They just have that belief.
And that's what they're
I don't fault them for that.
Mhm.
It seems reasonable. On the other hand, it also seems reasonable that I could have good outcomes from sex or drugs too.
Sure.
So if that's the case, what that value is might have to change or be malleable to a certain extent. So we're asking about, and I don't remember growing up ever, I guess we all considered outcomes to a certain extent, but not really. Meaning, okay, yeah, if you have sex, you might get somebody pregnant or get an STD. That's about the extent I think most people thought about sex. It was pretty simple thoughts. Drugs, it was either, as we think of outcomes, well, if you don't do anything, you don't risk anything. On the other hand, if you do, oh my gosh, it could run into you go from smoking weed to shooting up mainline in a matter of time. Next thing you're living under a bridge somewhere. It's an interesting concept that I don't know that much was put into the thought process. Meaning, did we take apart those things and really inspect them to say what's going on? So what's the difference between marijuana and heroin, for example?
In terms of outcomes?
Right. What's the difference between having sex with one person and having sex with, as we brought it, Bonnie blew 1,000 in a day or two or whatever that was. I mean, craziness. I don't know if anybody really looked at what's healthy in there.
Yeah.
Can we ask those questions?
I think we can. And it all goes back to identity, I think. That formation of identity.
Well, tell me more.
My identity as a kid was of the clean Christian kid, at least on Sundays and Wednesdays. But Friday nights, you might find me at a party smoking pot and funneling beers. But my identity, it was important to me to have an image. And that image becomes my ideology now. So now I'm living something that's not, it's not nuanced. It's not balanced. It's not really well thought out. It's really just a mask I've put on. And I can switch that mask out. And that doesn't seem healthy. And when I look back on the life outcomes that some of those decisions had on me, not super healthy.
Not super healthy. True. That's interesting. So I guess we're both coming down to we should develop thoughts around this much more than they were, at least at our time. And I think even how we deal with drugs now. We live in Colorado, which has legalized marijuana for some time. It was one of the first states to legalize it. It's become pretty mainstream. I remember when I didn't smoke weed. God, I don't know if I should disclose. I didn't smoke weed until I was probably later relative to my peers in college. And I remember, it's funny, I remember it being so stigmatized to me that I had developed a value that was, you can't do this at all. No drugs. I drank like crazy, which was ridiculous too, because that's one of the worst drugs, if you ask me, alcohol. But any other drug, I was like, I'm not going to touch it. So I remember smoking weed for the first time and going, what's the big deal? Well, this is it. This isn't a tenth as bad as me getting drunk for the most part. I remember thinking that and going, well, I need to have other thought. I need to start investigating all of this differently because I was clearly making an assumption about what that was. And what a drug was or whatever. And I think now as I've aged too, as we're talking about, I'm in the mental health world and psychedelics have become something. There's a lot of questions surrounding. Heck, I think the psychedelic conference is happening right now in Denver. But how that might offer solutions in the mental health arena, which is interesting because now I've done mushrooms and I realized that there might be some good outcomes to that when before I thought about psychedelics and that's not on the table. No way. So things have changed and I think I've become much more open to what it can offer me. But at the same time, I think as I'm trying to find my values according to that. I'm trying to find what balance is in those arenas to say, okay, this is okay, or this isn't okay, or what does this offer me? And to be really, I guess, just informed about what kind of outcomes this can provide me.
Sure. You brought up the psychedelic conference that's currently happening here in Denver, and I've heard a few people really excited that it's here because now that stigma, it's changing.
It is.
It's becoming more normalized to not only talk about it, but to actually have people from all over the country and the world share their research, their expertise, their insights about it. Because at least we're now having the conversation. But I imagine just as much as there's people who are excited about it, there are probably people who are staunchly offended by it and against it even happening. And that's where we get into that more polarized thinking. And I guess where I stand on it is I would probably lean more toward, I'm glad that we're having the conversation. I'm glad it's here. I'm glad it's happening because it's not just this taboo thing that we don't touch. So I think it's encouraging that the stigma is being changed because at least we're talking about it.
I think it's great. Yeah, there's a lot of great potential outcomes. And we need to do a lot of research to figure out what that looks like. But wow, to me, that's incredible. I also look back as we're brought up sex too, and what you started off saying and how that was viewed. It's interesting how that was, as you described your experience, how that was viewed and what that meant. And I wonder if our culture now as a whole is actually looking at that. And that's where people are coming down and they're deciding it's okay to be this way. I guess now I'm glad I'm not in the dating world to know, because that could go a lot of different ways. I can only imagine what's happening right now for a teenager or for 20 somethings and what they're going through as far as that goes. And there were a lot of peer pressures when we were younger. I can only imagine what they are now and what that looks like in these false beliefs, these distorted thoughts we have, as you talked about conquering or having that type of perspective. And I think that was very common. I think it still is very common. I think that's very dangerous as we talk about poor outcomes. That seems a pretty poor outcome. Somebody there is getting the poor outcome.
Well, yeah, I'm devaluing someone else when I think of them as a conquest versus a mutual, respectful, loving, intimate, healthy.
So now we're determining, you're making a decision about what that should look like. What is health? And it's interesting that now we're 50 and having that discussion about what is health.
You're 50.
Pretty close. But that's interesting to me. And I don't know that was had way back when, or if that discussion was had enough.
Yeah. Good point.
And I'm hearing it all the time when I see media, and the response is either to, again, that polarization. So I hate that. And I think that we need to figure out what that looks like. And it's not to shame sex, and it's not to say just the opposite of, hey, just go, bonkers, or the same thing with drugs. It's not to go from one side or the other.
It's not to say that drugs are just numbing or dissociative or unhealthy.
Right.
It could also mean asking the question, could they be healing? Is there a value, a clinical or potential therapeutic value to incorporating them? We have to at least look for it and have the discussion, because if we don't, we're going to fall on one side or the other, and rarely is the answer on the extreme.
So I guess we're asking everyone, as we're always asking our culture, our systems that we live in, what does it look like to build the values that serve us? Instead of just reacting to these old scripts or the hype that's nowadays, to going to the polarized opposites, to what does it look like to be in balance, to find health? What does that look like? What does sexual health look like? What does the use of drugs and health look like? Because there can be health surrounding. I think even though when I say that, there's going to be certain people that recoil.
And also asking, why is no one in the mainstream media asking these questions? Why do we want to leave sex and drugs as this cultural free-for-all? And then, but not reflect on what's actually going on, what's not working, what is, what's needed, what isn't. We're just not even having the conversation.
No.
So I guess we're here to ask, if you're listening, where in your own life are these stories running in the background on autopilot, but lacking reflection?
And what it looked like to develop those new values, your own values, and that they're grounded in what you know are going to be outcomes, good outcomes, healthy outcomes, and not just old beliefs or latest trends.
Yeah. We'd love to hear your thoughts too. DM us, message us, share your thoughts with us. Please don't savage me for some of the things I share, particularly about the JCPenney catalog. What we're getting to, this is the conversation that the culture won't have. We're just asking, is it
Let's
time
have
we
it.
maybe did? Is it time?
It is time. It is time.
Anyway, thanks for being here.
Thanks for listening. Keep slogging. Cheers.
Cheers.